From the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries, living many secret lives, struggling to reach the time of the gathering, when the few who remain will battle to the last. No one has ever known we were among you, until now. That is the opening narration spoken by Sean Connery in the movie I am reviewing today. It, of course, is the 1986 film directed by Russell Mulcahy, starring Connery, as well as Christopher Lambert, Clancy Brown, and Roxanne Hart. It, of course, is Highlander. There can only be one. Now, this is the second time I've reviewed this film. I reviewed it first a couple years back when I first saw the movie. And I decided to re-review it instead of re-uploading it. Now, since I first saw the film, I have become a bigger fan of this series. As you know, I saw the sequels, and when I re-review them, you'll see my thoughts on them in depth. I've skimmed a few episodes of the TV series. It seems very interesting. I'm going to give it a more in-depth watch and do reviews season by season. And then, of course, I'm going to also give the anime movie a stab. And maybe one of these days I'll even give the animated series a rewatch, because the animated series and the TV series is what I knew Highlander from mostly, not the movies. But anyway, that's a different story. Now, in addition to films and stuff, there's also books and stuff, like there's books on the TV series. But the first book, of course, was the novelization of the movie, Highlander, which I already did a review of this a while back, but I will probably talk about it a couple times throughout the review. And of course there's comics, which recently I happened to get my hands on one. I don't know if... It, of course, this one is Highlander, The Way of the Sword. Yes, there's some pages sticking out. I had to tape some pages back in because I was an idiot and opened it up too much when I was reading it. But I will reference this book a couple times throughout the review to point out some stuff, because just so you know, this book, this comic, is set in the continuity of only this film, where only this is the only thing that happened. So it's basically like basically a prequel side story to this. Now, before I go into the film, I should talk about the creation of the film. The original screenplay for the film was written by Gregory Widen, who, when he first wrote it, it was entitled Shadow Clan, and it was a class assignment when he was an undergraduate at the screenwriting program for UCLA. And he eventually sold the script for $200,000, which is a good chunk of change. Apparently he got the idea when he was traveling through Scotland on a summer vacation, and he saw a suit of armor and he wondered, what would it be like if this guy was alive today? And that's where everything fell into place. Now, Wyden's original draft of the script was significantly different from what we ended up getting in the final film. Here's some of the differences. For one thing, the story was much darker and much more violent. Connor was born in a different year, and he lived with his mother and his father. The character of Heather did not exist. Connor was promised to a girl named Mara, who rejected him when she learned he was immortal, and he also leaves his village. And he uses a broadsword instead of a katana. Ramirez is also a different character. He's not an Egyptian, and he's slightly younger. The Kurgan is called the Knight, and he's not much of a savage. He's more of a cold-blooded killer. And another difference that actually would have been interesting to see how they would have explored this, more so in the TV series, was that immortals could have children. In the draft, Connor had 37. And we even see a flashback where he's attending the funeral of one of his sons with his wife and some of his other children. And also, the thing known as the quickenings do not exist. There's like a brief mention of something similar to it, but it's a pure invention. I have to say, the stuff that they changed from that draft to the final draft, I have to say, kind of helped the film a little bit. But like I said, the whole children thing would have been interesting. And I'll say, even though they're planning an unnecessary remake, that would be one thing I wouldn't mind them changing. Or at least making it that immortals rarely have children, like they're sterile or something. It'd be interesting, because it goes with the whole immortality thing, which I will address. Now, the film, when it first came out, it got mixed results, I guess you could say. Like, let me go down to I'm looking at reception. Yeah, it wasn't really well received at first, but over the years it's gained a cult following, and all the sequels and TV series it's gained recognition. Like, one of the critics that hated it at first was Leonard Maltin, who only gave it a 1.5. And he said it was an interesting premise that was made silly and boring, that he did not like Mulcahy's direction, which I disagree with him on that. I think Mulcahy's direction is one of the good things about the film. And it's one of the things you notice after the first two films, that's one of the things that kind of set this film apart from the rest of the stuff. But anyway, that's a different thing. Nowadays, this film is looked at much more in high regard. Is held in much more high regard. I mean, as a 7.2 on IMDb, and on Rotten Tomatoes, with the critics it has a 67, and with the audience a 78. So it's a film most people enjoy. Because a 78, I would say that means most people. Now, the plot of the movie is that it begins in present day, or then present day, where we see Connor MacLeod. He's in New York City watching wrestling in Madison Square Garden. He decides he gets bored of it after having a little bit of flashback, because it's bringing up memories, which this is where we first see that there's something wrong with this guy, or something out of the ordinary. He leaves and he's confronted by a man named Fazil, who attempts to decapitate him, and they get into a little fight where it's rapier versus katana, battle of the different fighting styles. And after a little bit of a back and forth, Connor manages to defeat Fazil, decapitate him, and take his quickening, which is basically absorbing all the knowledge and all the power that immortal had. Of course, after hiding his weapon, Connor is arrested by the police, which they don't hold him for long because they really got nothing on him. And of course, another thing I must note is that the film goes back and forth with the timeline, like showing the present day storyline and then showing Connor's origin as an immortal, which works. Because after he's arrested by the police and stuff, it cuts back and forth at times, showing how he first became an immortal. It was during a battle in the 16th century between the Clan MacLeod and the Clan... I forget what the other clan was. Clan Fraser, there it is, Clan Fraser. Who had hired a man called the Kurgan, played by Clancy Brown, to fight with them, and his payment was basically taking out Connor. And of course, he doesn't manage to complete the job, but he manages to wound Connor enough to where he almost dies. And of course, because he heals miraculously overnight, humans being the superstitious creatures that we are, his clan banishes him. And he leaves, he eventually meets a girl named Heather, and they settle down until one day they are approached by a man named Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, who introduces Connor to the ways of the immortals, not only by showing him who and what he is, but also by training him in the art of the sword, because he needs to survive. And it's an interesting training sequence. It's one of my favorite sequences in the movie. Now, of course, eventually Ramirez is killed. I'm not going to spoil the specifics of it, but I think you can probably tell who it was. And of course, Heather eventually grows old. I'm skimming over this in the synopsis, so I'll address some of it in more detail later.
A police officer named Brenda Wyatt, played by Roxanne Hart, who is also an expert in metallurgy. She is one of the investigators working on Fazil's murder. She recognizes how valuable the sword is, and she finds some metal fragments from Connor's katana at the murder scene. Connor had just gone there to retrieve his own weapon, so he follows her to a bar, has some talk. She follows him. She witnesses a brief little skirmish between him and the Kurgan, and because of the stuff that happens during it, it piques her interest, so she keeps trying to find stuff out about him, and Connor, as you can tell from what he's gone through in his life, doesn't want her to have anything in it. And they develop sort of a romance, which I will say, it's semi-believable in the movie, but the novelization does develop a few more scenes going over it, and also doesn't hurt matters that we have the advantage of inner monologues here, whereas here we do not. But like I said, it's a semi-believable one. And of course, eventually you can tell that it's going to come down to Connor versus the Kurgan, but I'm not going to spoil the specifics of it. But let's just say the movie ends with a good end fight. Now, Russell Mulcahy,
His direction for this film was solid. He got great performances out of the actors. And even though you do see some music video type tricks in his camera work, I think it goes to the film's... it helps the film. Like for the training sequence, that plays out like a montage. And it works because it basically is a training montage, only without a pop song. It's more like a score. So it works. And also how he moves the camera, like when we see them training from afar, I thought it worked. And other than that, when he's just doing normal film tricks, it worked. So this is why this is an example of someone who came from a music video background being able to take their style and make it work in movies. Unlike Samuel Bayer, who did it the wrong way. Highlander, right way. Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, wrong way. Anyway, this was also this wasn't his first film. He had directed, before this he had directed 4 other films. As the Lights Go Down the previous year. That same year, another film called Arena, An Absurd Notion. A film which I've been meaning to give a watch called Razorback. And after this, the film he directed right after Highlander was, of course, its much-hated sequel, Highlander 2, The Quickening, which I actually do like the renegade version of that film, I will say. Other films he directed were The Shadow, which is a film that people are split on, but I enjoyed it. Resurrection in '99. He directed a film called The Mysterious Island for TV, The Curse of King Tut's Tomb, While the Children Sleep. Of course, he was the director of Resident Evil Extinction. He also directed Scorpion King 2. He directed a TV movie, which, even though I haven't seen all of it, I did enjoy the parts I saw, Prayers for Bobby, which got Sigourney Weaver an Emmy nomination. And the last movie he directed was Give 'Em Hell Alone, a movie with Thomas Jane. So you can see he had a semi-successful career, nothing really mainstream. I think probably Highlander is probably going to be his most well-known film, unless he does something very extraordinary with his next film, if he does another one. Now, the acting in the film, Christopher Lambert, I believe, I'm going to his filmography real quick, but I believe this was one of his breakout roles. Because I know before this he did that Tarzan movie, Greystroke, which I don't know if that would be considered his breakout role or this. But people definitely knew who he was after this. Well, wasn't a very huge, humongous star as far as I know, but he still did a lot of stuff, like, of course, the sequel, then his one cameo in the TV series, a deleted scene in Loaded Weapon 1, the movie Fortress, third Highlander movie, of course, the movie I know him from mostly as a kid. I don't think so. Playing Raiden in Mortal Kombat, which I really wish they had brought him back for the sequel. A Beowulf movie he did in '99. Southland Tales, and of course his small role in Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance. But he's always a guy that's gotten work. I'd love to see him do more bigger roles though, but he's probably getting a little too old for that. Roxanne Hart, she does a decent job for what her role calls for. It's, according to Wikipedia, this is her best known role too, and doesn't really have a big filmography list. Other films that she's been in were The Verdict, Oh God, You Devil, and The Good Girl. She's also appeared on TV in shows like ER, Law & Order, Criminal Minds, and Oz. So she does work too. Of course, Clancy Brown as the Kurgan. I don't know if you would call him a method actor, but from what I've heard about how he was on the set of the movie, mostly when you guys, if you've seen if you saw the fan commentary that I did with Effrey and Mike back when I first saw this movie, you guys know what I'm talking about. Him getting so into character that he's basically insane on the set. I think I'd call that a method actor, or at least semi-method. Now, since this movie, of course, Clancy's done a lot of work, and which I'll say he was perfect as the Kurgan, but he's done work like Pet Sematary 2, Revenge of the Nerds 3, Captain Hagley in The Shawshank Redemption, which I say he's perfect casting there. He was in the movie Flubber, apparently. Annabelle's Wish, he did some voice work for. Of course, he played the priest character in Cowboys and Aliens. Ironically, since I mentioned him earlier, he was in A Nightmare on Elm Street, which I did not even notice that was him. I think he plays one of the parents. And of course, he also does a large number of voice works, like he played Mr. Freeze in the Batman TV show. I'm talking about the more recent one, not the classic 90s one. He did some roles in the Justice League cartoon, like the role of Lex Luthor, which I felt he was pretty good with that. He did some other ones, like I think he did Parallax in the live-action Green Lantern film. And of course, video game fans will know him as Hades from God of War 2 and 3, which he uses a voice that's similar to his Kurgan voice. And of course, this is one that I kind of find a little funny. He also voices Mr. Krabs on SpongeBob. That's right, Mr. Krabs is the Kurgan. I'm surprised they haven't done a Highlander parody. You're too late, Krabs. I've already prepared SpongeBob for you. You waste your time. I want his money. I know I do a bad one, but I'm surprised. Of course, Sean Connery needs no introduction. The original Bond himself. You know, he's played other roles. He was in Darby O'Gill and the Little People. He played Robin Hood once. Outland. Of course, this was a couple years after he did his last Bond film, Never Say Never Again. The same year he did In the Name of the Rose. A couple years after Outland. And it was a year before he did The Untouchables, which he won the Oscar for, which I haven't seen all that movie, but I've seen enough scenes. Like, of course, I've seen the famous scene that has that quotable line, "You never bring a knife to a gunfight." But no, I probably screwed the line up, but I think you get the essence of it. Now, Connery, he did a magnificent job as Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. The character really fit the age Connery was at the time. And he has a look that you really buy him as the type of character that Ramirez is. He's kind of a sophisticated character with a sense of humor, but he also has a gravely serious side that shows through a couple times, mostly in the scene where Ramirez is talking to Connor about his immortality, which is a very well done scene, I will say, which I'll get to in a second. And the back and forth between Connery and Lambert, you really do buy they are friends, which makes sense considering they did become friends on the set of this film, which is why Connery was brought back for the sequel. Beatty Edney as Connor's first wife Heather. She did a good job for what the role calls for. The rest of the cast, like Alan North, John Pilato, Sheila Gish, Hugh Quarcy, Christopher Malcolm, they all do good jobs for what their roles call for. I mean, even though he's only in the one of the first scenes, Peter Diamond as Fazil also does a good job. Now, if there's one thing that this film does really well, other than being an entertaining film with some good action sequences and stuff, is it really nails home the fact that immortality is something that something you don't want. I know some people say they want it, but immortality is a curse. Think of it. The only way immortality could be enjoyable, and even then you'd feel after a while you'd feel like you don't want it anymore, especially if you can't kill yourself. The only way it'd be enjoyable is if everyone you cared about was immortal with you. If you're just singularly immortal like Connor and the rest of the immortals are, you're not going to be happy as time goes by and you watch all your family slowly die. And this film nails that home very well. It nails it home in two scenes specifically. The scene where Ramirez is doing the whole speech to Connor about how he watched 3 wives die and that he was shattered when the third one, which he considered his soulmate, died. That's where it begins to subtly show it. It nails it on the head in the scene where the Queen song Who Wants to Live Forever plays, and it shows Connor and Heather through the years. That scene, even though it didn't make me cry, but it's one of those scenes where I could tell I'm close to it. Well, at least the first time I watched it. It's still impactful with subsequent ones. It just doesn't have as much as the initial watch. And it's a very impactful scene. And like I said, nails it home perfectly. Now, the fighting sequences for the movie were very well done. Mulcahy, he shot them pretty well. I don't know who did the fight choreography for the movie, but he did it pretty well done. Connery, despite his age, I think he was in his 50s at the time he filmed it, you really do buy him as an immortal during his fight sequences, and he does show some energy, like when he does the whole thing like that. It's a flashy move, but it kind of fits Ramirez's fighting style, even though it doesn't really go with a katana. That's more of a rapier move, but for an immortal, he's probably had many teachers besides the guy who gave him the blade, so. The Kurgan, how Clancy Brown moves, you really do buy his fighting style being a more brutish one. Connor, you buy it being not the same as Ramirez, but you could tell he definitely was taught by Ramirez in it. Like, he even uses a similar move set, like where he holds his arm like that and that. Which, if that's something that's actually taken from an actual samurai sword fighting style, that's one of the inspirations you could see in Star Wars, because that's the opening stance of Form 3, almost. Just modified slightly. That's one of the things I noticed when I saw that. I'm like, hey, that's Form 3. No wonder Connor wins. He's practicing the same style as Obi-Wan. And of course the other styles like Fazil, his rapier style, pretty good movements. And then I forget this guy. I forget this character. How to pronounce this character's name? Forgive me. Castigar. He uses a scimitar. You buy his movements with it, even though we don't see it as up close and personal as we do the other styles. But still pretty well done. Now, my rating for the film, because I have no problems with the movie Highlander, is a 5 out of 5. Oh yeah, I forgot. Almost forgot this. Queen being involved in the film, their music really does help sell it, because it helps fit the scenes it's in, like I've already mentioned, Who Wants to Live Forever. Then, of course, the main theme that is used basically in everything Highlander related, Princes of the Universe. While the lyrics don't mention the mortals directly, how it's written loosely fits them perfectly. Give Me the Prize, the Kurgan theme fits in perfectly. Don't Lose Your Head, probably one of the weaker ones, but still pretty good for the scene it highlights. Then of course, It's a Kind of Magic. One dream, one soul, one prize, one go. That's a good song as well, and I do like that they gave it a cameo in the sequel. Very subtle one, but it's a good one. And then of course there's two other Queen songs that appear throughout, one from their previous films and then a cover which last time I checked hadn't been released of New York, New York, which it had a fitting moment there. Now I bet you're all wondering, since I've already finished with the film, I bet you're wondering what the plot of the comic that's a prequel to just the events in the film is. Well, the comic Way of the Sword is a one-shot story that takes place mostly before that, it goes back and forth in time like this movie does, but does it in a different way because, episodic comics, so it does it differently. Now the main plot is Connor MacLeod in a fight with the Kurgan in, I'm going to check the year real quick, 1804, in the Atlantic Ocean. He lost the sword because they were fighting on boats, so obviously there's going to be cannons firing. He stabs the Kurgan in the stomach with the katana, and during the struggle, the Kurgan falls overboard and he takes the blade with him. And Connor, it's not his main goal, but you can tell he wants to get it because of the sentimental value he has of it, because it was given to him by Ramirez, or left by him, so he's going to want it. We do see a couple other immortal characters, but only one of them is important. And that would be, I'm looking for the character's name real quick. Toshiro. Who we find out is actually a relative of Ramirez's by marriage. Because he is the adopted son of Masamune, Shikiko's father, making him Ramirez's step brother-in-law. Very interesting, actually. Now, he has a grudge against Ramirez because Masamune was originally forging the sword for him, but he decided to give it to Ramirez when he saw that his adopted son had evil tendencies that he did not like, so he gave it to his son-in-law, which Toshiro has always held a grudge against Ramirez for that, and Ramirez is gone, so it's going to Connor now.
Now the art for it is very well done. Like, let me find the, see it like here. There's a Kurgan. There's a brief little skirmish. Here's Connor sensing the presence of another immortal. The Kurgan killing a monk immortal. Which he didn't even fight there, but that fits the Kurgan's character perfectly. Which, by the way, in case people are wondering, that's actually a little bit before Kurgan is relieved of the sword. He's stolen to him by 2 prostitutes he hired. Now, as you can tell, eventually Toshiro and Connor are going to have to duke it out for ownership of the sword. And of course, you could tell, since this takes place before the first film, Connor eventually wins, but he isn't in danger the whole time. He loses another love interest in it, which is kind of sad, but he eventually does defeat Toshiro. But for those of you who are interested in reading it, I'm not going to spoil it. But what I do like is that we actually get to see, it does show 2 things. Like, it shows Ramirez actually getting the sword, and we also get to see Ramirez's first confrontation with the Kurgan, when Ramirez was fighting with the Spartans. And though there's one thing though about this that I do kind of respectfully disagree with their interpretation, is that according to this, the main reason that Ramirez had an edge against the Kurgan was his sword, which I could say that the sword will be a part of it, but based on what I see in the movie, I would say that Ramirez had the speed advantage, and also he had a more stylistic advantage. Especially when it was a single-edged versus a double-edged weapon. Whereas Kurgan had the more strength advantage, and also his weapon is a little bit longer, and also his own type of style. It was a clash of styles. But I always thought that Ramirez, that give or take, they were about equal. It's just that Ramirez was the stronger, and Ramirez had speed, and the Kurgan had strength. Whereas here, it was saying that the only advantage he had was the steel, which I do disagree with. The art makes it look like Ramirez was also faster, but to say that he could not have beaten the Kurgan by outmaneuvering him and using footwork the way that a samurai-trained warrior would, I disagree with that, especially considering he taught Connor all he knew, and that's basically how Connor beats him. But maybe it's just Ramirez doubting himself a little bit in his old age, thinking about stuff, overthinking it. Maybe it's just that. Now, of course, can't end this video without showing you Ramirez's wedding. That's his wedding in it. Yep, we finally get to see what Yukiko looks like, more or less what I thought she'd look like. And of course, Ramirez being given the weapon. There's Toshiro vowing vengeance. And of course, here's the art that was used, I think, for the covers when it was published in individual volumes. Connor and the Kurgan in their old school dresses. New school ones. I'd love to actually get a poster that actually has both of those, one on top, one on the bottom. This would also make a pretty badass poster. See? Ramirez and him. Ramirez and Connor, and the Kurgan on one side. Now, of course, there's other comics in the Highlander series I want to get, but they're connected more with the TV series now. Like I said, the movie, I give it a 5 out of 5. Rating for in case, on the side note, a rating for this as well, I give, on the side note, I give a 4.5 out of 5. If you can find a copy of that, I recommend it. If you can find a copy of the movie, I recommend it. It's on Netflix, which is how I mostly watched it, because I watched it away from home. First rewatching it, I'm away from home, actually, today. And that concludes this review. See ya.